Recreating prehistory.
Using rocks for hammering things into place.
Using anything you can think of it.
Be careful. Using anything that's bigger than you are.
I'm not sure I want to be this close to you guys.
I'll take care of you, Steve.
I'll protect you. We're going to have to wait a couple minutes because we have a missing panelist. So, I'm sorry.
Good, I can review my voluminous notes.
Good.
Oh, notes. Oh my God.
I know.
Now, you want a piece of paper?
Isn't
I have
controlling
paper.
thing to
I
do.
brought paper, but I certainly don't have anything to that.
Hierarchies, evaluating the evidence. I'm Holly Tannen. I live up in Mendocino, which is known as Northwest Nowhere. And what that means is, here comes Glenn, that I'm out of touch. I've been up there about 5 years now, so I'm out of touch with both new ideas in pagan thought and new ideas in academic, archaeological, anthropological thought. And I've been noticing over the past few years, all these books come out on the civilization of the goddess, the this of the goddess, the that of the goddess, the once and future goddess. And I look at these books and I notice, for instance, someone gave me a copy of The Chalice and the Blade, and I tried to read it, and every time I tried to read it, I got a headache. And I've been trying to figure out what is it. And at first I thought, well, maybe I'm just too stupid, or I don't have the educational background to understand this material. But I refuse to accept that, so I've been trying to understand these concepts about, was there a time when women ruled? Were there times when a goddess was worshipped, where the in its strongest form, I hear it as the ancient, universal, egalitarian, peaceful goddess-worshipping matriarchy. Right? And you're familiar with that as a concept. So I wanted to try and look at each aspect of that and see, both from an intuitive and a scholarly point of view, what sense we can make of that. Are there people here besides me who've been confused by some of these books? Yeah, and I would like to hear some of the ways in which we've been struggling to I don't know if we're struggle, trying to clear out the threads, untangle the threads of that confusion. So I called together some of the people who I most love and respect, and I want to hear what they have to say, and I also would like to hear what you all have to say. Macha has agreed to be moderator.
I've agreed to be moderator because I feel unqualified to speak on the subject, although I will undoubtedly have many opinions. But I want to also say, before we get too far along, that Greg Harder, who has been known around the pagan community for documenting activities and panels, is taping all this, so for posterity or whatever, and thank you. The format we're going to use is each of these panelists is going to introduce him or herself and say a bit about where they're coming from, what their current thoughts are on this subject, and then they may direct questions to one another, and at a point the floor will be open to you people, and I will recognize people who have their hands up to address one or all panelists at that point, rather than a lot of chaos. So that's kind of where we're coming from. And I'll just say my name is Macha NightMare, and I like panelists, and I like all the people on the panel, and I'm fascinated by matriarchy, but not crippled by the notion of whether it was or not a fact. I'm more interested in moving along with what we have now. So the next person.
Can everyone hear? Can everyone hear us? I could see some people. I'm hard of hearing, so I could see the signs.
Wind's blowing the wrong way.
Let's introduce all of us just for starters.
Sure.
I'm Holly Tannen. I teach folklore and anthropology at College of the Redwoods in Mendocino, California.
I'm Farida Fox, and I conduct classes and workshops in sacred ceremonies, and I also perform sacred ceremonies in Santa Rosa.
Well, I'll tell you again, I'm Macha NightMare, and I do classes too a lot with Reclaiming Collective in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm based in Marin County.
My name's Glenn Turner, and I have the store Ancient Ways, and I organized the festival here, and I've been teaching classes for more years than I can remember probably. And currently we have classes at the store. I do some, but not that many. And I certainly hear a lot of people's questions when they come into the store, and though we've got good staff who have to come up with answers for a lot of these questions.
I'm Steve Rasmussen. I'm the token patriarch on the panel, and a musicologist and an astrologer. Yeah, essentially, in a way, I'm here for gender balance, but I've also also been considering the question for quite some time, and I've been going around the conference kind of polling people on the subject too, trying to see what kind of feelings are out there, and hopefully I'll be able to bring some of that in too.
Did the people in the back hear the format, or do you want me to repeat it?
If you can't hear, raise your hand, and we will raise
yell
it.
Give us
out.
some clues.
Yeah.
We're just trying to avoid pandemonium at any point. Okay.
Actually, a good symbol is if you can't hear is to wave your hands behind your ears like this, and I've spotted it when somebody did that, so that's a good sign.
So who wants to start?
I'll be happy to start. Pardon me?
The format? Yeah. Each of these panelists is going to speak for 5 to 10 minutes about their current thinking on this topic, and then they're going to direct questions at one another, or be stimulated by what another person said or whatever, and then it will be open to the floor, at which point I will recognize people one at a time. That's basically it, and then we'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Okay.
Juniper over there.
Okay.
That's our qualification.
And I'm going to play the role of official curmudgeon and interrupter, which means that I sometimes can't follow conversations if they get too vague. So I may ask people, wait, what time period are we talking about? What part of the planet are we talking about? If I find myself getting confused. And I encourage other people to do that too. Just if you're not clear about where the threads are going, it may be that we know what we're talking about, but we're not making it clear to you. Okay. If I start to go on too long, give me a 2-minute notice.
Okay.
As I say, I've been trying to deconstruct what I call the Aufquam, ancient universal, egalitarian, peaceful goddess-worshipping matriarchy idea. But before I can deconstruct it, we have to construct it. Where does that idea come from? And what we've been dealing with is 100 years, archaeology is about 100, 120 years old, of an archaeology, like the other social sciences, has been blindsided by what we call the androcentric paradigm, meaning a way of interpreting facts based on the idea that what men do is important, and they do all the neat stuff like kill each other, and the women sit around the fire and take care of the babies and cook, and are traded by men as sex partners, right?
That's wampum. Money.
Yeah, women as a form of currency. But nothing that they did was really important. And so for 100 years, all the artifacts and sites that archaeologists found were interpreted through these blinders. Now, recently, what, 1950s or so, writings have started to come out saying, wait a minute, if we look at the artifacts that we have from the Paleolithic time, which is about from 30,000 years ago, the cave paintings, the figurines, those would be the main ones, and the Neolithic time, about 12 to 7,000 years ago, we find many more female figurines than male. We find female figurines, animals, ones that we can't tell the sex of, and male figures, but by vast preponderance of female figures. How do we explain this? And in the earlier books, they were just, fertility cults, right? These were fertility figures. What is a fertility cult? What is a fertility figure? But they were not taken seriously. They're not seriously interpreted. So the primary person who wrote the book that shifted the paradigm is she Latvian? Marija Gimbutas. Are you familiar with her work?
I think she's Yugoslavian.
Lithuanian?
Yugoslavian.
Where's Anna?
Right, Anna Korn should be here. Who's the
Gimbutas.
Lithuanian.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's her name. Maria
She's from one of the
Gimbutas.
Baltic countries where there's a very
she's
strong
from Hungary, I
folkloric
thought.
tradition of women-centered mythology. So she's in touch with the oral traditions as well. And she has been the one saying, wait a minute, there were, at least for the area that she talks about, parts of the ancient Near East, Anatolia, central Turkey, there is clear evidence that these figures were goddesses, were worshipped. There was a goddess-centered religion, which she interprets to mean that these societies were matricentric, that women were respected, that women had a much stronger role in politics and the decision-making process than they came to later on in historic time when men came to dominate. It's significant.
I just wanted to interrupt you 1 second. In addition to being androcentric, wouldn't you say that it's fair to say that most of archaeology and anthropology has also been Western European oriented in its perspective?
Yes, very important. That we've absolutely we've
Not everyone can hear if some
Okay.
voices can be raised.
okay we've pardon me.
The last comment was in addition to being androcentric. I was wondering, I was asking her if she didn't consider that anthropology and archaeology had also been viewed from a Western European Judeo-Christian perspective.
Absolutely, Eurocentric. We tend to
Eurocentric,
see
yeah.
civilization starting with the Greeks and focusing in Western Europe, and that has, I believe, we tend to make the assumption that cultural evolution happened in Asia, in North America, in South America, and in Africa in the same way as it may have happened in Europe, and we have to evaluate each of those very large areas separately. Thank you. I lost my train of thought. So Gimbutas, rats, I had a thought, but I lost it.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I would have done it in any case.
You were saying something about she, Lithuanian,
Right.
came out with a lot more female-centered vision of the
But it was
society.
the first time that this happened.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember my point. It's typical of the kind of thinking that we find in academia, that her book was entitled, came out I think in 1950 first, Goddesses and Gods of Old Europe.
It was entitled Gods.
Gods and
That's it.
goddesses.
Her publisher refused to publish it under that title, and they changed it to Gods and Goddesses of Old Europe.
Couldn't have the goddess first.
So this is what we've been dealing with, and it wasn't until she republished in I think 1980 that she was allowed to use her title. She said goddesses, were central and primary. So her books are a little over my head. I don't have any formal training in archaeology, and I've tried to read them, and I find myself going yes and my heart opening, but I don't find myself really being able to understand her interpretations of a lot of these figures, and that may just be a failing in my training. But what I get confused by and irritated by is a whole cycle of books by feminist authors taking this position that all across the world, universally, there was a matriarchal or matriarchal meaning that women held the decision-making power, peaceful, no war, goddess worshipping, monotheism, worship the goddess. That is, there is the idea that there is the goddess, and that all the goddesses that we see of various cultures are aspects of one, the goddess. And there's a level on which I can't argue with that, because on an experiential level, on a heart level, that feels true to me. However, it obscures some very real cultural differences. I mean, if we say that Demeter and Kali and Oshun and Athena are all aspects of the goddess, we're obscuring some very real differences, both in what we know of the ritual practices of these goddesses. In some cases, as with Oshun, the Yoruba deity, the way her practice is still practiced in this country, both the rituals and the myths of these goddesses, which are very different. So it's important to me that we study each of these goddesses in depth and find what is known about each of these goddesses. And I see so many books that frustrate me because they will, Eleanor Gadden's book, The Once and Future Goddess, for instance, talks about, here is a shrine sacred to the Caribbean goddess. I'm going, what? Because the Caribbean islands have African-based religions, but they're different from island to island, and there are many of the Yoruba and Fon goddesses there is no the Caribbean goddess that I know of. So this kind of writing makes me feel nuts. And as I tried to figure it out, the most useful concept that has come to me is this, that there are facts and there are interpretations of facts. And what we have to distinguish is what is a fact? What can we know for sure? And interpretations have to be made, especially dealing with archaeological evidence. But what interpretations are reasonable and plausible? And what inferences can we reasonably draw? And when I made this distinction and went back and looked at the books like Vicky Noble's book on her mother, Peace Tarot, and Merlin Stone's book, and the one, When God Was a Woman, what I found was giving me the headache was that in one sentence or in one paragraph you have facts and interpretations all tangled up, and the interpretations stated as facts. For instance, a female figurine to me is a female figurine. It is not a goddess unless I have some clear evidence, say from mythology from that same area, or if I see a female figure that's this large, surrounded by animals and people that are that large, that's very suggestive to me of it being a goddess. But simply, if it's found in a shrine, that's suggestive, to me of being a goddess. But what we have are female figurines from the Paleolithic and the Neolithic, many of which we don't know where they were found, because they were ripped off by the British and French archaeologists and put in museums. So up until, I think, 1920 or so, we don't know where the woman of Willendorf came from. Was she in a shrine? Was she in a house? We find some of these female figurines are, most of them, would have to get into individual areas, and I don't have time. But there's an awful lot of leaps of faith between saying, here are some female figurines, and saying that they're goddesses. And even if we can prove that female figurines are goddesses, does the fact that goddesses are worshipped in a culture mean that there is gender equity, that women had power over their own lives? And I'm not even sure about that. I want to believe that, because I see how the God as daddy figure has led to, is used as a justification for disempowering women. But I also see polytheistic cultures with goddesses in them, in which women don't have the power or respect that I think they should have, either in the present or the past. And I guess the last thing I want to say is that the main problem I find is in interpreting archaeological evidence. I don't see how we can know for sure even what rituals people did in the Neolithic. Remember, this is all prehistory. That means before there was writing. We don't have any writing for these periods. So about the time of farming communities in the Neolithic, many, many female figurines. But do we know what people actually did? And even more important, do we know what people felt and thought? I'm just not sure how we make those leaps. And I want you to know that there is a whole development in feminist archaeology now. There is a course being given in Berkeley 2 years ago on archaeology of the goddess. So there are women asking these same questions in academia, and we're shifting that paradigm, and we have to start being clear about this thing of what can we know for sure, what interpretations can we make, and we have to, even if we particularly love one interpretation, I think I love the goddess interpretation, but that makes it even more important that we look at the other possible interpretations to make sure we aren't being seduced by our own wishful thinking. You want to be next?
I guess we could just go in a row, right?
Mm-hmm. That would be linear of us.
All right. Well, I tend to take things from my personal body experience, and of course, I came to this religion or belief system or whatever we want to call ourselves from the need to member myself, the need to recognize to validate my experience as a woman. And I think many of us came into goddess-focused religions in this way. And it's only natural if we consider that perhaps we have had 4,000 years or more of one kind of excess. And unfortunately, being humans, we seem to have a predilection for excess. That's one of the things that we tend to get into. I have no doubt that there were goddess excesses, just as there, or in some places.
Still are.
I'm sure.
Maybe even
yes,
tonight.
I'm sure.
Yes, you know.
Hey, wait, maybe only a few miles from here. Anyway, and I come from a part of California where there's a lot of feminist separatist activity. So I see it and I hear it a lot. And there is a part of me that resonates with that. I would almost wish sometimes, there were times in my healing of my own self where I wanted to be separated from men. I did not want male energy in my life, and I didn't want to deal with it in my own being, because I felt immediately attuned to the sacredness of the feminine experience. Now, when I would see images and hear about images of entire temples that were built in the shape of a womb, for example, or that people would go into these places to worship, supposedly. I mean, I'm very trusting. I will trust those statements of Marija Gimbutas, for example. I would feel something resonate in myself. And I would feel something that would say, yes, my experience of childbirth and my experience of watching my daughter give birth to a daughter is an ancient piece of sacred wisdom. And I want to acknowledge that, and I want to bring it back out. I want to retrieve it for myself and for other women. But I am concerned that if we're looking at the definition of matriarchy in the same way that we have defined patriarchy, then we are in trouble, because it is monomania. It is a view that is completely divorced from the what I call the beloved other, which we have not yet achieved parthenogenesis as humans, despite what some feminists might say. I don't think. And we need to learn how to work together, how to appreciate and respect each other, how to really, how not to manipulate each other's best interests. If you approach someone with an open heart, that is not the time to cut it out, or cut out the other one's heart. You see, and we've had 2,000 years of pain and struggle, and we're right on the brink. It seems to me we can go either way. We can fall back in to excess, into disrespect. We can have that pendulum swing back, or we can say, no, we have an opportunity now to really accept one another, male and female, to heal that within us, which is perhaps thought of as the alien other, to bring that part of us back together. And I hope that's what I try to do in my work, and that's what I try to address in people, and that's what I need to address, since I feel all place in my body, and that if it's true in my body, then it has some reality out in the world. As far as other cultures, and I'm pretty Eurocentric, I have to admit it. That's where my main focus is. But there is one other culture that I do have a blood and bone connection to, and that's Polynesian. And I find that there are the similarities on a large scale of recognition of, for example, the energy of the young woman, the energy of the reproducing mother type woman, and the energy of the crone woman as elder is very similar as it is to in other European ancient cultures as what little we know. So even though I agree that their practices are totally different and developed from the needs of different people from wherever they live and what they need, still there are some general feelings, I think, of honor and respect to the woman who begins her period, who begins her womb opens and her blood flows, as a sacred event and an astonishing event, and the same kind of respect and honoring of the woman who brings forth the child who comes out, or who is who is in that period of her life, and also the same kind of respect and honoring of the woman whose blood is now within her and is the basis of her wisdom in her age. And that's what I find is similar for all of us. That's it.
Very nice. Thank you. Well, I'm not going to say much, but I will say that, like a lot of people here, I came to the craft and to goddess worship through feminism, because when I was growing up, there was no female image of the divine that I was ever exposed to, except for Mary. And that was, and she was crippled in her own way, limited. And the second thing that has occurred to me as I'm listening to the other speakers is that I think this has a lot of bearing on magical reconstructionism that we see around, like Norse traditions which are being reclaimed, and Egyptian traditions and Sumerian and so forth. I think that it informs our pulling those things out of the past. Louder. Oh, no one's hearing me? Sorry. I was just saying that a lot of what I heard, I think, informs our magical reconstructionism in reconstructing magical traditions that as we imagine them to be and as we feel them when we're building them again. Norse reconstructionism or Sumerian or Egyptian or whatever it happens to be, I think it's very much informed by this kind of material, and I appreciate it for that as well. And I won't say any more right now because I'm not a panelist. I will pass it over to Glenn.
Okay, well, I'll take my hat off, and now the shade is a little bit my way. I heard some great things, and I wanted to chime in and, throw in my 2 cents and interrupt, but I managed to hold it in. So hopefully I can remember some of the things people said. One thing Holly said at the end of her comments was about, in a sense, a kind of... Okay. One thing that Holly said at the end of her talk was about a kind of wishful thinking, that we are projecting our wishes of goddesses being great and so on onto history. Well, it's well known that that's what historians do. You take a book of history and archaeology and you say, what year was this first published? You check it out. Okay, 1920. Well, they're not going to get it. Even Kramer on the Sumerian studies. Well, actually, in the 30s, there were quite a few. The Great Mother was published. The Great Goddess was published. There was a tremendous interest in goddesses about the time women were getting the vote. 1920, 1930. So there was a lot of thinking in our grandmothers' times. These were men writing it, so it was kind of a nice thing for them to do. And I can't recall the content of the different books that I'm quoting. There's Neumann and Briefwald. I can't get their names right. But anyway, so there was something of that then, and then more currently we have people like Joseph Campbell popularizing, and his early books, Hero with the Thousand Faces, boy, how patriarchal, So in the 50s, we really didn't have very many. We did have, like, Robert Graves wrote The White Goddess, and that was very instrumental for me because my mother was reading it when I was 15, and I heard them talking about it around the dining table whenever he published it. However, it was kind of the thinking of feminist women of my Bay Area parents' generation was, a woman wanted to be told she thought like a man. That was really good. Well, that is okay, However, so as reading who published what when, even Kramer on his Sumerian things was writing about Inanna. Once he got connected with a woman who was strong enough to kind of change and help him correct his thinking, he realized that these feminine endings on, the word for scribe probably meant that these were women, and realized that this may be, and so it helped him with his thinking, and as the years have gone by, he's improved. Gimbutas, from everything I've heard, is, even the most critical critics laud her on her scholarship. She is not one of the people who leaps past. She is scientifically very good as an archaeologist, and she doesn't make these great leaps. It's things like The Chalice and the Blade and some of the books that Holly mentioned do take leaps of, facts and ideas put together. I think what we're seeing in that is exactly what historians know is the case, which is that you put you learn more about the historian than the history when you're reading it. And so what we're reading in my book, is that we're reading that women are reclaiming their own selfhood. We don't need to think like men because we think just fine, thank you. So what we're seeing is not so much reclaiming the past, though that's what we're doing. We're practicing on the past, and we're taking the pieces of the puzzle, and we're seeing if this shape will fit. We're going to try it on for a while and see if this shape fits. And what we're doing is we're trying to make a theology or a theology that will suit us today. So what I think we're finding is, monotheism is a very interesting approach to religion, but when I look around me, I don't see a oneness, really. And to impose that doesn't feel good to me, and so I've kind of tossed out monotheism, period. I don't know that I really believe in a great goddess. I don't know if I believe in anything, but if I do believe in anything, it's in certain aspects of divinity that are found in certain situations, maybe even trees, but there are certain feelings, certain seasons, certain things like that that I can recognize. Now, I'm taking this feeling and projecting it into whatever archaeology and history I find and go, oh, here's a temple shaped like this. Gee, Dr. Freud, that looks like a vulva to me. And, that feels good, oh yeah, vulvas are nice. But of course, it's a projection, and it's what we need to be doing now. And on the other hand, when, young people come in and they talk about the matriarchy, well, what period are you talking about, of course, is the question. Are you talking about Sumer? There may have been a matriarchy at that time, at that place in early Ur, where the scribes were women, and maybe the men were busy killing themselves, and the women were staying home, or maybe the men had better sense. Well, actually, they were being invaded after a while. But so, goddesses and matriarchies. It makes me uncomfortable, and like in Chalice and the Blade, where I think is one of the places, this is the most popular book, we sell a lot of it. I must confess I get very impatient and haven't really read it all, so it's very hard for me to talk about it while I don't have the patience to read it. But from what I get is that This is the idea of the equality of men and women as partners. This is a projection of what we want. This is not history. This is projection. And as a projection, it's fine. If we know this is a projection, that's okay. And if women want to think parthenogenesis is possible and they want to project that into their world and have a separatist women's only space, well, that's fine. That's what they need right then. Though obviously scientifically, you know, it's laughable, but not laughable, it's just not possible right now. But so I'm not quite sure what I wanted to say about matriarchies and goddesses. I know that what I like best is not a single goddess, though I know in the craft we do tend to, you know, look at the goddess. And in my tradition of the craft, in Narug, we have an invocation to the triple goddess that's based on Robert Graves's White Goddess, and I find it very moving. I find, you know, but to me, I can go back into a multi-approach goddess, and when I think of the maiden goddess, I think of dozens of maiden goddesses that I've read about, and if I think of the mature motherly type of goddess, I think of Demeter and a dozen others. And if I think of the crone aspect, I think of Hecate and other wise women. So for me personally, I came into the craft and the goddess, well, a little bit at the dining table as a kid. Later, after I got, you know, tired of politics for a while, it was the feminist movement did not seem to be answering my needs as a single mother with 2 kids. It was sort of like, well, don't bring those kids in here. We're having a women's only meeting. So I figured, you know, the craft was a place. We were building our own mythology where a woman could be the leader. And I thought, I like that idea. I could be a leader. I could handle that. I could work with that. It's something difficult, but I think that's something that by doing it is empowering. And it's also by stepping aside from the feminist movement, which didn't answer my needs as a person who wanted to just go ahead with my life. I mean, for me the craft was good because I've been able to just do whatever I wanted, and people would, it's okay for a woman to be a leader. And I guess that's it. And in a way, you know, we are examples to those who are yet to come, as we are making the matriarchy, if such it is. Or maybe we're making something like the Chalice of the Blade, where it's an equality, where people who are good at certain things, I mean, I've had lots of kids and dealt with lots of people, and maybe, you know, mothers are kind of good at that kind of thing, and maybe some men are better at climbing tall mountains. I don't know. But so that's where I'm coming from about the goddess and the matriarchies.
Well, I'm thinking about this question. I've had to really face a lot of my own possible prejudices. You know, am I resenting this matriarchal goddess-only focus because it threatens my own macho mystique or something? No problem there, I'm sure. But you know, I think it's something that's pretty important to be doing throughout this, is questioning our own fundamental assumptions. And one of the reasons why I think this is so important is because I'm looking at this especially as a social phenomenon. There's a much larger context going on here than just our personal beliefs, you know, about the goddess and whether she should, you know, be the lover and consort of the god or vice versa, you know. What's going on? To put it in a curmudgeonly fashion, what's going on is that a revival of polytheistic spirituality that's really begun in the 60s and is kind of flourishing at, you know, like here at Ancient Ways and so forth, and really permeating the mainstream of the culture. I see it being railroaded into the battle of the sexes. You know, it would be the same as if, as when people railroad Catholicism, say, into buttressing Marxism versus capitalism. You know, it kind of sucks all of this diversity, all of this complexity of what we're really reviving here, which is you know, the vast enormity of pagan religion, into this one little set of boxes, one labeled with a little male sign and the other with a little female sign. You know, I think we set ourselves up for that, because we don't examine our own theology. We don't question whether it's really enough to say the god and the goddess, and oh, and by the way, they're straight, they're not gay, and a lot of the gay people, gay witches I talk to, are very dissatisfied with that. It also you know, it also perpetuates a really deep, how shall I say it, a really deep thread that's running persistently through Western culture and Western thinking, especially propagated, I think, by Christianity, but it continues through the period of dominance by science, which is the whole question of hierarchy. In other words, we always structure things as a pyramid with somebody on top. And you know, I've had experience of that in the magical community, in certain neo-pagan traditions, which place a very strong emphasis on matriarchy. And in my experience, you know, matriarchy, patriarchy, it's still a hierarchy, and it's still someone bossing you around, and that's a big problem for me. And I don't see it being really addressed. People give lip service to the idea that, oh yeah, when we're talking matriarchy, we're really talking equality of the sexes. Okay, now next paragraph, what we're really talking about is burial sites where the woman was in the center and all the men were buried around her, that sort of thing. Constantly shifting the view of history in order to conform to our own mythology, to a mythology that we're trying to develop, but fundamentally we've inherited, well, anthropologists say that Christianity, one of the unique aspects of Christianity and the culture that's derived from Christianity, is that it replaced mythology with history as the
Right, sure.
it's like Jesus Christ was born in 1 AD, you know, and we're going to go out and dig up the ark, you know, to prove it. And that has become our mythology, is history. And so what we do with it is we warp history in order to fit our mythology, and that goes on whether you're reading a 19th century historian who's talking not only about patriarchy but also about about Charlemagne. You know, what a great leader he was. He centralized all the authority in himself, and yes, he slaughtered the pagan Saxons and forced them to be baptized, you know, at the point of a sword. But hey, you know, he gave us order, and that's a sort of bias that runs through most Western history, most Western thinking. I'd even say, which I see running through these interpretations of the archaeological discoveries that are being made. It's always this divided duality. It's the phrase I use for it. You're always setting good against evil, you know, black against white, male against female, and depending on which side, you know, you want to buttress, you're lining up those little correspondences and setting them against each other. So, you know, now it's the matriarchy against the patriarchy. Great. One thing I did want to add about Gimbutas, unfortunately, as has been pointed out, one of our experts, especially on her work, isn't here. But I've had a lot of conversations with her. Anna tells me that basically Gimbutas's earlier work was real groundbreaking and is basically universally accepted among anthropologists. More recently, however, the books she's come out with have been doing this very thing we're complaining about, which is pouring everything into this single, you know, curvaceous mold. And quite literally, actually. For instance, she went to a slideshow that Gimbutas did at Black Oak Books in Berkeley several years ago, And she said there was, all the slides she showed would always show, these figurines of the goddesses, or whatever they were, the Venuses of Willendorf and such. It's enormous there on the screen. They looked like they were goddesses. They're always big. You had no scale against which to compare it. But if you knew something about about these particular figurines, you knew that figurine is actually only this tall, and could very well have been a toy. It's again this kind of distortion that that we're doing that concerns me most. There's a couple other interesting points I wanted to raise. I personally experience the Earth as the supreme goddess in my pantheon, and I do experience the Earth as a goddess. That's not universal. The Greeks, for instance, had not only Gaia as the Earth Mother, but also Tellus as the god of the Earth, which is where this word Tellurian currents, which dowsers often use, comes from. What? That's exactly the point. Which Greeks? Yeah, different tribes had different representations of the Earth, and some of them were male. Again, in Norse mythology, the figure associated with the Earth, Nerthus, is sometimes female, sometimes male. You almost get the sense that it doesn't really matter. It's the Earth. And again, I keep coming back to this polarization that goes on. There's a sense in which I think divinity transcends male versus female. I mean, they say that as a spirit you can't procreate, so you don't have distinguishing sexual characteristics. And I wonder if our constant focus on, to conclude, if our constant focus on the polarity of God and goddess, archetypal male, archetypal female, isn't really our effort to grapple with a concept that's very foreign to Western linear thinking, which is the idea of yin and yang, of the intrinsic duality of the universe. Everything's in balance. And that the only way that our culture, especially on the mainstream level, can really get a handle on that is by reducing it to the sexual level, which is what it's familiar with anyway, constantly having that particular image bombarded into its brain by advertising. Yeah, somebody else asked me to raise this point who I talked to earlier, that if you found, if archaeologists dug up the remnants of our culture, they'd find a vast preponderance of female images. They'd all be on billboards, of course, and selling cars, but they could interpret that glorious blonde posed next to the red Fiero, that is, she's sanctifying it. She's giving the blessing of the goddess to the Fiero. I mean, it's a dubious proposition. Yeah, okay. I think that concludes my rant.
Thanks. I wanted to make a couple of small comments. One being that, for instance, Graves in The White Goddess puts it out as not science and not archaeology and not anthropology. And I think that's fine to do theory like The White Goddess and call it that. Merlin Stone puts out these books that are really interesting, but I mean, they're academically real shaky. And I want to believe him. I'm really idolized by a lot of feminists. And her head has undoubtedly been turned by that, and I think it would be nice to cut her a little slack for that. And offer, I mean, because what would we be like if we were having all these people going,
seriously ill.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And Jim Durant pointed out that she spent, 40 years doing incredibly detailed scholarship about these figurines, and he said, she's in her 70s now, and maybe she's tired of trying to prove anything. Maybe she's just writing from what she feels, and the same thing. Why don't you just, maybe any of us in our 70s might feel like doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, in defense of the Venus of Willendorf, I mean, I don't think she was a toy. I I mean, I
No,
think
I don't
there's
either.
it's fairly out there that those little figurines were placed at doorways of places where people slept or lived or ate. And it was a very revered figurine. And we don't know whether there were greater statues made in some sand form or something like that, but definitely not a toy.
Anna's criticism in this particular case, and I was with her when she spoke to Maria about that, was that there was no point of reference. It wasn't that they were big or small, it was just that there was no point of reference. And from an academic standpoint, that is an important factor.
When we're talking about academic points of view, though, we have to remember that academia is essentially a patriarchal organization, and I am in academia, and I still feel, even though I get a lot of credibility that way, that it's essentially something that was created by the male part of our society. And when we're talking about whether academia sanctions a certain piece or doesn't, we're acting like that makes a big difference, you know? And it only makes a difference in a very small parameter, and we have to acknowledge that part. I mean, academic works are wonderful. I enjoy the heck out of them myself. But it doesn't cut whether or not the piece is an active piece for me. And I think...
What, the piece is an active piece?
Yeah, if I resonate with the
okay.
information in it, whether or not it meets academic standards or is accepted by academia makes very little difference for me.
Well, it makes a lot of difference to the person that I was speaking on
Yeah.
I
behalf
wasn't
of.
even making a reference to your
no.
comments, but to this gentleman.
Yeah. So, were any of you really stimulated by what you heard?
Totally. We got somebody here who wants to.
I thought we weren't going to open it yet.
Well, okay. And let's let us, if we have something to address of each other, we'll say that first, and then open it up.
I'll do a fiber on that.
Okay. I had a couple of things. Yeah. In anthropology, one of the things people look for are cultural universals. What is really true of all people and all cultures. And one of the few things that is culturally universal is that every one of us spent 9 months inside a woman's body, and then however many months, depending on the culture, being nourished and nurtured by that woman and other women, and sometimes men, but mostly women. So in a sense, we all have a personal experience of being within the body of the goddess. And I think it's partly that makes us resonate so much with the and again, at some point in our relationship with our mother, Dad starts coming in again. This is what Freudians call the Oedipal triangle, and Dad starts wanting some of Mom's attention. And pardon me?
If Dad's even present.
If Dad's present, yes. But so I can see how the idea of a goddess worshipping matriarchy, which is infiltrated by patriarchy, would make intuitive sense to us, because I think each one of us, or many of us, have had a personal experience way back, almost beyond memory, of that happening. So I think that's why we resonate so much with this idea of here come the invading patriarchal nomads, home from the office.
One of the things I wanted to comment on that you actually began to mention had to do with the polarities of male and female, and getting caught up in that as the one and only true and right way. In many other cultures besides ours, besides the Eurocentric culture, in many other what we might call more earth-based cultures, like Native American, Polynesian, Australian, Aboriginal, there are a very highly revered class of society is what I think is referred to in Native American as the Berdache, which is to say one who is neither male nor female, but the divine androgyne, so to speak, and the holder and the keeper of the secrets, because that person is not pulled by the by the polarities. That person is able to be freed from that polarizing that we all tend to get into from time to time. So I just wanted to mention that is something that our culture needs to come back to. I believe that somewhere in our genetic memory there is the recognition of that divine being also, or that teacher, or whatever we want to call that person. So thank you for mentioning that, just to put that forth more.
I had something to speak on that too. I thought that was good to hear brought out. And one of the things I find interesting about the living tradition of the Orishas is that many of them are androgynous in a certain way, where Shangro, who is extremely macho, has an aspect where he dresses up like a woman. And there are, these multiple aspects, and I think in a lot of Jungian and modern psychology, there is, recognition, at least among, kind of forward-thinking people, that, genderism is not necessarily the kind of little box that everybody fits in, and that many people have extremely numerous facets of their selves, sexually and personality-wise. And that's why I like a very diverse, non-monotheistic, a very polytheistic thing, because if I look at myself, I see an extremely faceted person, whereas one place I'll be very outgoing, and the next time I look at myself I'm very shy and timid, and the next time I turn around I'm inarticulate, and the next minute I'm something else. So, and maybe one day I feel like a boy, and one day I feel like a girl. Maybe I'm just more, varied than some people, but obviously there's some sort of bell-shaped curve out there. And so I like the idea that looking to the future, we're taking this and we're taking and experimenting with the best parts. So we're going to steal all the good stuff from the past. And if the good stuff from the past includes a variety of genders and orientations, I think that's appropriate, at least for California. Now you might go someplace else.
Iowa too.
You might go someplace else and they don't realize that, but on the other hand, we are the leaders intellectually. California, let's face it, and Northern California, we have been the leaders of thought for 50 years, and I don't see any reason we should be stopping. And so the fact that we are, accepting of gay and lesbian, and, a side mention about lesbians, they want their own space, and so I think the matriarchy image has been extremely important for the lesbian community as a, we don't need those guys approach, and that's good. They should be able to do that. On the other hand, I don't think they should think that this is somehow etched in history, whatever history is. That was just my comment.
I want to say something real quick, just responding to what you said, and this is not a criticism, but merely a further refinement, I think. And that is, you talked about stealing stuff from other cultures. The word bothers me, because what I feel is it's our stuff, we're reclaiming it. We come from those people and we come from those cultures and we have their DNA, So that's, I just wanted to make that distinction.
I just assume that anytime, like copying is a compliment.
Yeah, well, I'm calling it reclaiming because I'm sort of...
You're from reclaiming, aren't you?
That's why we call it that.
About that.
Okay, that's what I wanted to say.
Since I noticed that Lazara has showed up, did you bring that yellow book? Could you, I really want to recommend this book to people because it's, maybe you could describe it briefly.
It's a book called The Mismeasure of Woman by Carol Tavris, and it covers a lot of ground. I haven't gotten very far into it, but one of the chapters that I just read and just dealt with was called In Search of the Feminist Utopia. and it deals with this exact same topic in a very creative way, I think, because the way that she wrote it provoked me to think and make a comparison to today's society where we have images of women everywhere, you know, and what do they mean? It was a very interesting thing, and the way that she described finding little, you know, the little goddess statues and all this, she made it very clear from an objective point of view that it could mean anything, which brought me to think about today's society where we have pictures of, if you want to look at it that way, Aphrodite everywhere. You know, we have pictures of the sex goddess everywhere. And it's a really, really interesting book on a lot of levels, and that's just one of the many things that
Yeah, and
gained from this book. She also talks about the Greenham Common women. Part of their platform, or whatever you want to call it, was that they felt that the duality aspect was what was creating the strife, not looking for a concept of matriarchy versus patriarchy, but looking for an egalitarian common ground.
Does everybody know that Greenham Common is being made into a park?
Oh, I didn't know.
Yes.
Greenham Common in England.
What's that?
Explain
Oh,
in England.
yeah.
England.
It's the area around the.
It's a peace encampment that's been in
I think this
existence.
book should be
required reading.
required reading for
I'll get a whole bunch for the store and put them out where in the front.
everybody.
Yeah, and there was one last comment that I wanted to make on that. Anyone who studies cathedral architecture soon discovers that the Christian church is just chock full of female images of the divine. You know, there's Mary everywhere. There's, for instance, on the west portal of Chartres, there's each of the 7 liberal arts is represented by Pythagoras, Boethius, you know, the great male figures who founded these arts, but each of them is being inspired by a goddess who stands above them, probably intended as an angel, but the imagery is definitely feminine, and that runs throughout Christian art and of the Middle Ages and Renaissance. But yet, I don't think anyone has ever accused Christianity of being matriarchal.
Right. No. See how misled we could mislead ourselves by making statements about the roles and statuses of women in medieval and Renaissance society based on if we only had that architectural evidence.
Tavros also deals with the Renaissance era, and she says that for women there was no Renaissance. The Renaissance did not exist for women. And that, you know, even though they were being heralded with all these beautiful images of feminine lord, it meant nothing.
Yeah.
I think we're ready to open up.
Let's,
Two of them,
yeah,
three
we
of
got,
So there's a man in a purple shirt.
I'm reading a book now called Goddess, Whores, Wives, and Slaves.
Very good book.
Yeah, and it deals with the status of women in Rome and Greece. And I've only read about halfway through it, so I've only covered the Greek part. But you'd think when Sparta and Athens were fighting each other, that the Athenians, seeing that Athens is named after the goddess Athenians, and the Spartans were more warlike, you would think that the women in Athens would have more freedom, but not so. And as a matter of fact, according to her estimations and what she's read, is that the women in Sparta actually had a lot more freedom and a lot more authority than the women in Athens did. So you can't always go by what goddess or what is being held, what the position of women are in that society due to their gods or worshippers or whatnot.
this is a very good point because classical Greece is one of the time periods which we think we have the most information for. But the author of this book, Sarah Pomeroy, points out that it's still very hard to know what the actual life of a woman in classical Greece was. How much was she? To what extent was she confined in her house? To what extent did she have some personal freedoms? If you just look, and we have, you know, the women in the plays, the Greek plays are tremendously strong actors, like Antigone. The women, the goddesses are very strong in the mythology. I don't know much about the rituals, but even for this highly documented period, we can't make assured statements about what women's everyday life was.
What's it? Could you wait?
Women weren't allowed to, were not in the play. Only men could play in a play.
Right. Yeah. They played the strong women.
Roxana?
Yeah, I had a point to make that was sort of in line with that. I think one of the things that we need to be careful here is confusing matrilineal societies with goddess philosophies with the social phenomenon. And I think that a lot of the scholarship that has been done delineates between those, and they talk about goddess philosophies or goddess theologies or theologies or whatever you want to say, and they talk about various stages of the goddess, or the great mother goddess, and then the goddess into many aspects, and three aspects of the goddess. And all of the questions that have been raised about that have been very good, but that is separate than what they believe were matrilineal societies in which women were honored and were considered to be the mother of children, and in the society, in the culture, property was passed down from mother to her children, because it was the only way one knew that you knew who your mother was, or you knew who your child was. You didn't always know who the father was, so that property and office quite often was passed from the mother to the child. That's matrilineal, and not very many people really talk about matriarchies, because matriarchy is something that is our response to the patriarchy. They believe that in the matrilineal societies, men weren't necessarily denigrated. It's just that property was passed through the mother to her child. So we have to remember to break these things out, because I think we're kind of lumping things here when we probably shouldn't.
There's also matrifocal, and then we get more into the way the culture and society works. So you have the matrilineal that passes property down, and you know that line is the important line as far as anything heredity goes. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the overarching structure of the culture or the society that we're looking at is a feminine or a masculine. So then you have a matrifocal situation which focuses on the woman as far as something being revered or respected or focused upon in terms of the culture. So I think those distinguishing things would break it down.
Thank you. Just in a sense of process, though, could we have people recognize one at a time? I know it's stimulating.
The two people had their hands
And
up.
I think the man in black hat is up first.
I just think it's curious why we're as interested as we are in the historicity of matrifocal, matrilineal matriarchy. I mean, granted, there's a lot that we can draw from it, and it can be an inspiration for creating what we want now, but I think to a large degree we look to it for validation of what we're doing, and I don't think we need that. I mean, we can validate what we're doing based on its effectiveness and its worth to us now. And so there's a big trap we're easily prey to here, and we need to keep that separate too.
Yeah, I think you're right to one point, but as a woman who has had not a lot to look to in the past that's validating, I think there is also an equal amount of importance to be stressed on reclaiming what we may have lost. And I agree, I mean, we are still on the fringes, no matter how strongly we feel about who we are as pagans and witches. We are on the fringes, we aren't the mainstream, and we haven't had as much effect on the culture at large as we would like to see. And to me that seems to reinforce what we might be able to, the effect we might be able to have.
The woman in the front row had a hand up
Yes,
for a long
so
time.
did
She was
that
just one of
validation.
those
I know, I got her.
Okay, Diva?
I think there's another thing that we can get from trying to reclaim these traditions, though, is that in pointing out the other possible interpretations, it really puts the spotlight on how what we have called history is also mythology. So in The Chalice and the Blade, which I agree is a lot of just Rian Eisler's, interpretation, when she talks about a Greek play that's hailed, in patriarchal history as the beginning of the jury system, but she points out, well, do you realize this play also showed that children aren't born of their mothers, they're born of their fathers. That's kind of an important thing, So the next time someone brings that up as an incredible play, I can say, well, wait a second, this is not this incredible thing to be heralded. And I think that will help to create the future by defusing or invalidating. But I also wanted to make a comment about what Steve said about our, hyper-focus on gender. And I agree with that because I read that book that's popular now, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, to sort of, understand more the men in my life. And I found the book really resonating with myself, those archetypes. And the men that wrote it, they did get, and I can't remember their names right now, but they gave one line in the book, and these archetypes can also be applied to women. Like that was one sentence in the whole book, And I found the book, just wonderful, and it helped me to sort of shape how I wanted to holistically balance my life with the 4 archetypes. And I just thought, these men, they had to write it like that to sell this book right now in this time period. You can't write a book and say, these are the universal 4 human archetypes. It had to be, they had to collect all the male mythologies and all the hero figures and write this book and market it to men because we're a hyper gender conscious society right now.
Well, I believe that book is I didn't realize I had
I have to remember you now, but there's a couple of...
I've been kind of finding in my own experiences that it doesn't really seem to matter to me whether there actually was a matriarchy. But I started noticing that when I started going to the Renaissance Fair, I found that the idea of the Renaissance Fair was the Renaissance the way it should have been. Idealistic role models that we can create, that we would like to find in ourselves, to bring out qualities that we have denied ourselves because society says you're supposed to be this to be valued in any station that you can possibly be valued in. And I'm finding this is beginning to allow me to be more of a human being, a whole person, rather than just a part of a person. That you can be a whole person and be male or be female, but you're a human being before you're anything else. And I'm finding that being able to create role models. And so it doesn't matter to me whether this little statue was a toy or whether it was a revered thing, but when I hold it in my hand, how it makes me feel inside, whether or not everybody else feels that, because everybody else is going to experience it through their own experiences and through their own, how they feel about themselves inside. I think that's what's more important, rather than trying to say, to blanket across and say, this is how it was, but this is how it can be for me, and how can it empower you and you as a woman and me, and yet be different for all of us, and yet empower all of us.
Okay. First, I'd like to say that we're a fairly select sample, and this is a fairly unusual occasion, and that part of why I think it makes sense, and I think we should even give a fair amount of, freedom of artistic expression to women to put their ideas of the past as reality, is it goes so against the grain of so many centuries of scholarship that maybe has to be stated very clearly as a fact, undeniable. And then maybe you can negotiate and say, well, maybe it's partially wish fulfillment, but if you start out by saying this is wish fulfillment, it probably wouldn't have even gotten any kind of real recognition as an alternative. And that even now in the 90s, we're a lot further on than we were 20 years ago. And so now that, I don't know, women may be in the Air Force shooting people down in planes, somehow it isn't quite as important that women back then were shooting arrows and, warriors. I think we've accepted that women can be a lot of things. But that's very, very recent, really. And especially here in California, Northern California, yes. But a lot of places, maybe, in Dixie, that's not the truth. And so, by feeling there's at least a possibly real time when women were powerful, I think it gives a lot of power to the idea that, yes, they can be powerful. So, I definitely support that. I had one comment about stealing traditions, which you said, which I wasn't going to pick on you because I knew that was kind of jesting, but I have noticed that certain people, particularly Native Americans, are very touchy about that. And sometimes though I feel that they're also too touchy. I mean, personally I feel that part of the reason why...
We'll make up the market on shamanism.
Every one of them is going to have a different opinion. They'll run the whole gamut from go for it to don't touch it.
Yeah. But, and finally I just go on the clear fantasy thing. It seems to me that you might even imagine that history has had waves of various power. It's possible that maybe women were the first to really chat with each other. Because men just grunted and went out in the trees. Maybe for a little while, the women just were the society. The men were kind of like semi-tame animals that were running off and bringing the meat back. this.
You're saying things have changed?
And then, well, maybe then it went through a period where the men took over because they were powerful enough, and then there was an earlier patriarchy that maybe gave way when there was cultivation, and the women cultivated and started growing wisdom and stuff. So I think this possibility, it's very hard because it's all prehistory. It's possible there have been not only one but several waves. I think the farther back you go, the better the chances that there was more of a single religion, because I think at the very, very early stages when humanity was just beginning to realize that there was such a thing as passing tradition on, there probably weren't that many contenders around. It may have started in a fairly nucleus way, and then as it spread out, then started differentiating, just like languages have tended to be more centralized at first and then spread out and change.
We had a response from the panel.
Yeah, I wore this shirt because it symbolizes diversity to me. And that's one very important point, I think, about looking at history is we're always in the habit of putting it onto a straight line from a single point source and saying, you know, in the past everything was this way and then before then it was that. It's all we know is what's survived. It's like looking through the wrong end of a telescope, you know, and the more I study the past, the more I find what an incredible diversity it really is. However, what I wanted to reinforce the point you just said is that this kind of diversity doesn't play well on television. This shirt, you know, when you're painting things for mainstream culture, for millions of people, you paint them in very broad strokes. And in that sense, I'm kind of sympathetic to the, you know, to the people like Gimbutas and so forth who are painting a counteractive picture to the traditional male-dominated one in very broad strokes, primary colors. It's important, though, that as people who have already gone through that doorway, you know, we've already discovered the goddess, and then we've discovered all this other multiplicity. I think it's important for us to keep adding those footnotes to people. You say, yes, but also, and do you realize that? And, you know, maybe that's a role I try to play a lot of times, and, you know, maybe it'll help.
There's a, yeah. Something that you said just caused me to want to bring this forward. There is probably a strong possibility that in early Paleolithic times, no one knew what role the male played in reproduction. So that truly the mystery of what was going on in women's bodies was really awesome. And from that awesomeness, much developed. And I just want to throw that out since we will all never really know, there will not be a big scripture that will open and say this is the way it was. We can only reconstruct. I just wanted to put that out.
Very important point. Yeah. There's a quote that I like. Yeah. That's, it is the customary fate of every great truth to begin as heresy and to end as superstition. And I guess my commitment is I don't want this great truth. I'm not exactly sure what the great truth is yet, but I know there's a great truth here that we're addressing about the sacredness of women and the sacredness of men and women's interaction. I don't want that to become, I see it starting to become superstition, and I want to keep it open to both intuitive and intellectual dialogue.
The lady who said she's Gail's mother, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but
I know some of the men were, you know, saying things about, had feelings about the women's movement. A lot of that, I don't know if you understand this, a lot of that is a great deal of anger from like thousands of years. But I think hopefully that will go away and it will balance out. There's two signs. One, the gentleman mentioned the Chinese, the circle, what is it?
Yin Yang.
There's another one, I don't know if you're familiar with, one thing the Christians aren't most of them aren't aware that the cross is a phallic symbol, the male symbol. But the Egyptians had the cross and the female circle, the circle, which is light. We have to get back to that balance.
This gentleman over here has been patiently waiting.
Mention of the book, I think it's by Johnson, King, Lover, whatnot.
Can't hear a thing.
All right, there was the mention of the book about the king, the warrior, the lover, the Mach. Okay, I believe that book was written more with the men's movement in mind than for the general market, just as I think many goddess books are written for the women's movement in mind rather than the general audience. And I want to remark that, at least with my experience of the men's movement, reclaiming our heritage is just at the early stages.
We got a late start, I'm sorry to say, because of various changes in scheduling, and apparently other people are due to use this space from 2 to 4, so I would like to give the panelists an opportunity to wrap up if they can. I'm sorry it could go on forever, and perhaps you can seek people out now that you know we kind of know who each other is later on.
Yeah.
But if we could just have like a 5-minute wrap up on the part of the panelists, we could clear out this space and give it to people who have reserved it.
Okay, I don't want necessarily to be first yet.
Oh, okay.
I need to say that.
You want to?
Well, I don't know what I would say to wrap this up. I would encourage everyone to look to their own personal experience of divinity, of holiness, of what is sacred, of holding the goddess or the figurine in your hand and feeling the centuries fall away. We have borrowed much from more in-touch native cultures who have graciously allowed us to dance in their circles. It is time now for us to awaken our own blood and bone to know from some deep intuitive place within us what feels right, what resonates within us for our own sacredness, and recognizing that again, whether it's words like matriarchy, patriarchy, what essentially are divisive. Balance and connectedness and respect is, I hope, what we are going to be focusing on for now.
I know what I want to say now. When I started looking at these books, I was very surly about it. You know, these authors are wrong and I'm right. And I realized I was doing, with like a unconscious divide and conquer strategy by the patriarchy. And I've come to the point of view that another thing that's sacred is conversation. Mm-hmm. Respectful conversation. And I want to throw that out to you, is that for me, this kind of dialogue is so growth-inducing for me, to hear people whose points of view may be very different from mine, but be able to teach myself to really listen to them. So I'd like to throw out the idea of conversation on all these topics as sacred.
Right. Thank you. Good. Yes?
Well, yeah, since my final point kind of follows up on that, I'd just like to encourage all of us to maybe start doing what I've begun to do, which is whenever somebody refers to the god or the goddess, I'm starting to ask, which god and which goddess? I mean, Isis, Astarte, Hecate, and Demeter make a great song lyric, and it's
and you can substitute 4 others too.
Yeah, right. But Hecate ain't Demeter. It's not in my personal experience. And that's a very important thing I meant to bring up too, which I'll conclude with, which is that our culture teaches us that there are only 2 ways to approach spirituality. One is through the book, the Bible, And the other is, which tells us that there's just this one universal God, and there's that particular assumption that we tend to make. The second is the scientific one, which is that all this spiritual stuff is really just a psychological Jungian Freudian projection anyway, and it's all subjective and so forth. I find in my own experience that neither of those are true, that there are, there are genuine spiritual beings and forces which I'm not projecting onto. I can, and I'll mess myself up if putting these images on them, but it's much more informative to experience them as they are, to ask them who they are, rather than try to impose upon them an image that happens to fit our particular political or social agendas. So that's it.
Well, I was going to talk about political and social agendas, actually.
Neat little chain going here.
In a sense, in that I think it's important that we recognize that we have a political and a social agenda, and I was thinking about the title of this workshop being Goddesses and Matriarchies, and the social agenda that we have is a sexual revolution where women were no longer slaves to procreation and could choose to have 2 children instead of 10 children, because I'm sure I would have ended up with 10. And so, and I was able to choose to be financially independent and to choose to raise my children without the help of a man, because I was free to do so in our society, which is very different. Women were very, when my grandmother, I mean, you could not survive without, in any other way. A woman needed that breadwinner. And so social agenda is very important, and I can't forget it, really, that because history is sort of real to me in a certain way. And so the matriarchy is something that we have been privileged to live in a certain way in our own lives, at least in mine. And also, like the goddess, our society is, when you say the Pledge of Allegiance, under God was inserted, I remember, in my...
Eisenhower.
At some point I had to learn to, say it different.
Right.
And,
I remember that.
under God. And so we have a very Christian-oriented society and a very God-oriented, we practically got a government that had that in it. So in a sense, the goddess is a political statement in that while I don't think there's one goddess, and I wouldn't want there to be one goddess for goddess sakes, but the fact of the matter is if it's going to be under something, under everybody or under spirit, or that's kind of, waffling. I'm not a monotheist, but on the other hand, there should be another hand to under God. And so, to me, our religion here is an expression of our social situation.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you all for coming and apologize to those of you who were burning to speak and didn't get a chance to, or were burning to say more and didn't get a chance to. I didn't have anything to do with the scheduling. I apologize. I wanted to thank Greg for taping it, and Polly for getting the impetus to get it together, and the other panelists for doing their thing, and encourage you all to keep up the dialogue.
Thank you.
When
Hey, you
we
can
break
probably,
up. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
grab us and
Yeah.
talk to us.
Thank you.
Punch our lights out.
Yeah, right.
No, let's not promote the macho.
If anybody's interested, the body image workshop will be starting